I read a total of 11 books in December, so I feel like this wrap up might be quite long. And while I did read quite a few books, I didn't really have the best reading month in terms of ratings. I didn't love all of the books that I read. I also want to mention that I'm not going to do reading stats in this video like I normally do, because I'm going to do a whole separate video on my 2018 reading stats, so I don't really feel the need to talk about them from December here. The first book I actually really loved, and that was Eleanor, Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I gave this one 4 stars. It's about a woman who is almost 30. She has a very set routine and is kind of just going through the motions, and then a couple of things happen which means that it kind of throws her world off kilter and it kind of changes how she approaches life. She was abused as a child, and I feel like that had a massive impact on how she acts as an adult. She has a very set routine, almost as though she has Asperger's or autism. It's never actually said in the book, so I don't know. I thought this book was fantastic, which is why I gave it 4 stars. Eleanor Oliphant is an amazing character. She is somewhat relatable, and she's kind, but if you don't understand her, she doesn't come across that way, and that's what really got to me, because her intentions behind things were legitimate, but it didn't always come across that way because of the way that she acted, and this book made me cry. It was awful. I got very, very emotional because she is just the best character. It was very difficult reading about her relationship with her mother, and because they have regular phone calls, her relationship with her kept coming up, and her past with her mother kept coming up. So some parts of this book are very difficult to read, and I would go into it cautiously if you have trouble reading about child abuse or abusive parents, but it's actually an amazing book and I can't recommend it enough. The next one I read is Legion and the Emperor's Soul. I'm counting this as one book, although it's 2 novellas. The first one, Legion, is not set in the Cosmo universe. It's about a guy who has imaginary friends, basically. He talks to what other people think are hallucinations, and they help him out when he's solving cases. In this book, he travels to Jerusalem to follow a guy who has stolen a camera. This camera takes photos of the past, and they think that the guy is trying to disprove the Christian religion, or various religions really. I thought Legion was okay. Sorry, I thought someone was stealing my parking space outside. I thought Legion was okay, so I gave it 3 stars, but The Emperor's Soul was amazing, so I gave that 4 stars. This one is set in the Cosmo universe. It's straight up fantasy. It's about a woman called Shay, or Shy, and she is captured and she is told that she has to forge the Emperor's soul because the Emperor was involved in an assassination attempt. He's basically brain dead, so she has to weave his soul back together, and she has to very carefully do this using these magical stamps which together create the Emperor's soul. I thought this was fantastic, and I would happily have read 200 more pages set in this world and about this character because it was just fascinating. This novella was about 150 pages, if not more, and Sanderson did a really good job packing everything into it, and I just really enjoyed it, so I gave that 4 stars. The third book I read was Evermore by Sara, Holland. This is a sequel to Everless, in which time is basically currency and it's taken from your blood, and so time gets taken away from your lifespan, or added onto your lifespan if you get more time. I didn't really like this one. I gave it 2.5 stars, but I would probably bump it down to a 2. I enjoyed the first book enough. I gave that 3.5 stars when I first read it at the beginning of 2018. Nothing about Evermore really appealed to me. I thought it was very generic and it didn't add anything new to the fantasy genre. The main character was kind of dull, and the beginning kind of dragged along because it was a continuation of the first book, which had a cliffhanger, but this book kind of continued as though nothing had happened, and that was kind of annoying. I didn't really care for any of the relationships in the book either, apart from the relationship between the alchemist and the sorceress, but that didn't really come up as much as I had hoped. It wasn't developed as much as I wanted it to be. And that's all I'm going to say about that one because it's a sequel and I don't want to spoil anything. I then read The Suspect by Fiona Barton. I gave this one 4 stars. I mentioned this in my new releases video for January. It's about a reporter called Kate who is in Fiona Barton's previous books, and this time she is covering the story of 2 missing girls who go missing from their gap year while on their gap year in Thailand. This hits very close to home because Kate's son is also travelling around in Thailand. He quit university and went travelling, so she's more involved in this case than she thought she would be. I really like this one. I think this is my favourite of the 3 Fiona Barton books I've read so far. It's an adult thriller, and to warn you, it does get very dark, so if that's not your cup of tea then maybe don't go for it. But I felt a lot more of a connection with Kate in this one than I did in previous books, because this one was very much more about her, whereas the other books were more about the cases and the characters involved in those rather than the journalist Kate. I'm not really sure what Fiona Barton's going for in terms of her relationship with the police officer guy or the detective guy. Fiona Barton added in a couple of things about the detective guy and his personal life, which I felt weren't really necessary unless they're building up to something, but at the same time I don't want them to build up to anything, so I hope she just leaves it as it is, and that was just kind of, you know, an add-on that she was trying to use to flesh out the character more, which didn't work, by the way, because the detective guy is the most boring character. I then read Frostblood by Elly Blake. This is the first book in a YA fantasy series, and it was alright. I gave it 3 stars. I probably won't be continuing on with the series just because it didn't wow me. This is set in a world where fire and ice are at war with each other. The main character is a fireblood, and she is living in secret in a nation ruled by the Frostbloods, and she joins a rebellion to overthrow the king. I don't really have much to say about this one because the storyline was very generic. She met a guy and joined a rebellion, tried to overthrow the king. She's super powerful, the last of her kind, and that's all you really need to know because that's all that really happens in this book. I didn't really like the relationship between the main character and the love interest because it was hate to love, and then there was this twist which happens in almost every YA fantasy book that I've read, like in one way or another, and that was just kind of unoriginal and everyone knew where it was going, so I didn't really see the point in it. Another 2-star book I read was Acid by Emma Pass. This is an older YA book. I think it came out in 2013. It's a dystopian book set in 2133 or something. The main character has been imprisoned for murdering her parents, and right at the beginning of the book she escapes and has to go into hiding. I thought this one was very poorly paced. The main character jumps from one point to another. There's always something happening, like things blowing up, and she has to flee and try to hide again. And then you don't have any time to get settled before you move on to the next thing. And that also meant that the characters and relationships weren't developed enough for me. I can't remember anything about the main character and her personality. I thought she was kind of dull, apart from the fact that she's a really good fighter, which I don't really care about because we didn't see much of that anyway. And then her relationship with the guy in this book was also underdeveloped because they had known each other for 2 or 3 days before kissing, and she was saying she was in love with him, and it was just too much. I think the author could have done better with the pacing because I think she had a really good idea with this world in which Acid is a police force which is ruling the United Kingdom, and it's cut everyone off from Europe, which might actually happen IRL. It has segregated its citizens. So I think the idea was decent, but it wasn't executed very well at all, so I gave this one 2 stars. Thankfully, I then read a really good book, which was Empress of All Seasons by Emiko. I gave this one 4 stars. It's a YA fantasy and it came out in November of 2018. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to do a full review on this one, I think. It's Japanese inspired YA fantasy. The main character is a yokai, which means she's like a creature, she's not human. Her yokai kind of group or race or species is animal wives, which means she and her female relatives seduce men and then take their money before coming back to the village and then doing the whole thing again and again. The thing is, these animal wives have to be enticing and pretty, but her mother doesn't feel like she's any of those things. So her mother has trained her from a young age to be a great warrior, and that is so that she can fight in this competition to become the empress of this empire. To do this, she has to battle 4 seasons in 4 magical rooms, and if she does so, if she's the last one standing, then she can marry the emperor's son, who will become emperor, and then she'll become empress. This is a standalone, and I thought the pacing on this one was fantastic. Emiko did a fantastic job in the short amount of time that she had, because this isn't a very big book. It's about 450 pages, if that. It's 366 pages, which means I'm even more impressed. Emiko packed so much world building and mythology and character growth and relationships into this book that meant I would really actually love a sequel to this, if not just another book set in this same world, because I love this world with the yokai and the humans at war with one another because the humans have enslaved the yokai. And there are hints of rebellion, which I also love in books and TV shows, and I just loved it so much. So 4 stars for this one. And then we got towards the end of the month, which is when I started rushing through books in an attempt to finish my challenge. And the first one I read for that was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and I didn't like this. I gave this one 2 stars. I think this was a reread because I remember reading some of it at least when I was in school, and honestly it was just awful. I think, judging by this book, Charles Dickens is overrated. However, I haven't read any more of his books. I just really didn't like the writing style, and I feel like the story could have been fleshed out more. It's a very short book. I wouldn't personally recommend it. The Underground Railroad, which I gave 3 stars. This is historical fiction about slavery, in which the Underground Railroad is a literal railroad. 2 black slaves escape the plantation, get on a train, and go somewhere that they hope is better. The book started out very, very strong, but unfortunately I didn't end up loving it because I think towards the end, definitely in the last half of the book, it started to drag and the author kind of lost his focus, I felt. It jumped about a bit and I didn't really know what the author was going for, and the writing style also took a bit of time to get used to, so I gave this one 3 stars. I then read 2 review copies, and the first one was Fame, Fates and the First Kiss by Kasie West. I gave this one 3 stars. I give most of Kasie West's books 3 stars, to be honest. I like her writing style, I tend to like her characters, but they're nothing standout. This is a YA contemporary about a girl who is an actress and she's on set every day, and someone starts to sabotage her career, which is just kicking off. Of course, there's a love interest who is really adorable and not the love interest that I was actually expecting, which is nice. I have to say the main character doesn't really go through any character growth. She comes across as very selfish and up herself, so I feel like that was a bit disappointing, especially since it's a contemporary book with not much else going on. I feel like Kasie West could have focused on the main character more. But I did like the romance and the mystery element, I guess, because there's a minor mystery about who is doing all of these things to sabotage the main character's career. So I think this is actually one of the better Kasie West books that I've read recently. There have been a couple of duds, which I've rated 2 stars because I just haven't enjoyed them. And then finally, the 11th book I read was Freefall by Jessica Barry. This is another review copy. I gave this one 3 stars as well. It's an adult thriller about a woman who is in a plane crash and she has to get back to civilization. We also get the point of view of her mother, who is trying to find her daughter. At the same time, someone is trying to find the main character who was in the plane crash, so that's where the thriller element comes in. And I thought this one was okay. I didn't find it particularly thrillery. It was a decent book to end the year on, and I don't really have much else to say about it. I thought the main character could have gone through more character development and her past could have been explored a lot more, because I was very interested in her past rather than her relationship with her husband, her fiance, sorry. I wanted to read more about how she reached that point where she met her fiance. I just felt like it could have been more. So that's it. Those are the 11 books I read in December. Hopefully this video hasn't turned out to be too long. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye!